Today's lecture will be over Chapter 4, Section 2. Objectives: number 1, explain the factors involved in world's population growth. Number 2, describe the distribution of the world's population. And number 3, describe some factors that influence population density and carrying capacity. So today what we're going to be looking at worldwide population growth. Why does this population grow? How do we look at it? And what we have to do is we have to look at quite a bit of numbers. The first is going to be a birth rate. A birth rate is going to be the number of live births per 1,000 people in your population. So if you've got 100,000 births, you're going to divide that by 1,000, and you're going to go ahead and say the birth rate is 100. So it's per 1,000 people. Fertility rate, and just looking at the bottom one there, or the next one, mortality rate is going to be the same thing, but it's going to be the amount of deaths per 1,000 people in a given year. So what we look at is we look at birth rate and we look at mortality rate. Now, one of the things about birth rate and death rate that we want to look at is that we want to go ahead and we want to look at something that's called the rate of natural increase. And what we can see is that we can see the birth rate, and then we can also see the death rate. And what we see is that, and what we have looked at as geographers is we've looked at just simple birth rate, just simple crude numbers, and we can see that usually there's three different levels right here, three different stages, I should say. And what that means is that at the first stage, there's going to be a lot of births, but there's going to be a lot of deaths. Now, all countries have gone through this stage right here. But when you start talking about first world countries, developed countries, they're going to go through the second stage. The second stage is where birth rates continue to stay high, but the death rate drops. Now, in the first stage right here, you're going to see that the population is just going to go ahead and it's going to stay level because a lot of people are having kids, but a lot of deaths are occurring. In this stage here, there's a lot of births, but the death rate has dropped, and so we're going to see a lot more people. In the final stage, the birth rate has dropped and the death rate has dropped. And what we see here is that the population is going to go ahead and it's going to kind of level off. So all developing or developed countries have gone through the second stage and the third stage. Developed countries, you want to go ahead and you want to decrease your birth rate. And the reason is that, again, according to the rate of natural increase, we subtract the mortality rate from the birth rate. If that number is very high, that means your population is growing, and that can cause problems. If it is a negative number, that means that your population is going to be decreasing. So we can go ahead and we can look at birth rate and death rate, I should say mortality rate. We could also look at something that's called fertility rate. Now, fertility rate is the average lifetime number of children born to a woman. This is, in my opinion, an incredibly important number because what we can do is that we can look at the fertility rate. For example, if the fertility rate is very high, 7, 8, that means that the women of that country would be on average having 7 or 8 children. Now, what that means is that we can kind of assume that the people of that country are an agricultural-based society. Because if you think about it, for example, teachers. Do teachers need to have 7 or 8 kids? No, they don't. That's kind of a drain on their economic standing. But if I'm a farmer, I want to have 7 or 8 kids because that's kind of free labor right there. So if the fertility rate is high, it's going to mean that agriculture is going to be kind of the primary industry. If the fertility rate is low, that can also tell us a lot of things. If we go back to the rate of natural increase and we find out that the death rate is low and the birth rate is low, what that means then is that the fertility rate, if it's down near the 1 or 2, or 1 or 2 range, average kids, that means that they're going to go ahead and they're going to have less kids, which means they're probably in the third stage of development, which means they're probably a developed country or a first world country. So fertility rate tells us a lot about what's going on inside a country. Another thing that tells us a lot is going to be infant mortality rate. And this is going to be the deaths under the age of 1 per 1,000 live births. Now, what's important about the infant mortality rate is that if we have a high infant mortality rate, that probably means the country is not doing very good. And the reason is that if a country is developed, if a country has a lot of money, usually the first thing that they do is they take that money and they spend it on things to help kids, help pregnancies, help the birth process, make it so that the people are not going to die in those situations. So when we see high infant mortality rate, that usually means that countries are struggling economically speaking. So those rates right there show us a lot about the population of a specific country. Now we also have a population pyramid. This shows a population of a certain country in terms of men and women and age distribution. So what we see here on this population pyramid right here is that we can go ahead and we can see on the left side is males, on the right side is females, and if you look up here, this is Iraq in 2014. Then if you look here, these are the numbers of or how old people are. So how many people are 0 to 4? You can go ahead and you can estimate about 2 million boys and about 2 million girls. And what we look for the population pyramid is we don't look so much for specific numbers, but generalizations. For example, in Iraq in 2004, you're seeing that there are a lot of young people, 0 to 4, 5 to 9, 10 to 14. There's just a lot of people in this area. And so what's going to happen is that the following year, you're probably going to see, if we looked at a population period of Iraq in 2018, what we would see is that these numbers probably say that the people that are 195 to 99, really above the age of 90, have probably died off. But look at how small those numbers are right there. But you're probably going to add on an additional 4 million people with again, if this is kind of, if trends continue on, you're going to see another 4 million people. So the population of Iraq, of course, is going to be increasing, and that's what we look at when we look at population pyramids, is what is happening to the population. Now, inhabitable lands, what we see is that 2/3 of the world's population lives between 20 degrees north and 60 degrees north latitude. So if we look at a map right here, that includes the United States, and you continue up towards Canada, and then again that's also going to continue into areas such as you're going to continue in areas such as Europe. You're going to continue into places like China. Even India is kind of considered that northern part right there. So what we see is that inhabitable land, most of the world is living inside that area. And if you think about it, there are the top 3 countries in world population is the United States, China, and India. They all fall in between those lines right there. Why do people live there? A lot of different reasons. Number one, temperature and precipitation allows agriculture, which means we can grow things. There are also a lot of coastal areas and rivers. Also in the polar regions, mountains, deserts, people don't live there, and so mostly through that area, that land is pretty hospitable. Now, urban and rural, more than half the world's population is rural, but is rapidly becoming urban. What is urban? Urban is going to be cities. Rural is going to be kind of the more of the countryside right there. So what we see is that people are migrating to these areas right there because of something that's called a push-pull factor. Push-pull factor, very important in geography. What a push factor is a push factor is pushing someone out of the country. So these could be things like droughts, wars, famines. These could be things like not enough jobs. Push factors make people leave the country. Pull factors are things that might bring someone into the country. These might be things like good jobs, might be things like favorable cultures, things that bring people into a country. So when we look at push-pull factors for the United States, we would say that there are more pull factors than push factors because there are more people migrating to the United States that are leaving the United States. So again, push factors for a single country. Push, leaving the country. Pull, coming into the country. Another thing that we look at is population density. And what we can see is population density is the average number of people living in an area. So what we can do is that we can look at a population density of, say, India, and that means that the population density is probably very high because they've got a lot of people in a small area. Ironically, population density for China is lower because there are more people inside China, but there is more land. So that's going to go ahead and that's going to average out to be in a lower population density. China's a good example of one that's got a high carrying capacity, and this is a number of organisms an area can support. United States has a very high carrying capacity because we are so large. We've got fertile land, level of technology, economic prosperity, all things are going good. An example of a very low carrying capacity would be a place like Haiti. Not very many good jobs, very small area, people are competing in this area, and so there's not going to be as many people able to live in that land, and so carrying capacity is going to be lower. This concludes our lecture for Chapter 4, Section 2. Please complete the assessments at this time.